do some exercise that involves physical interactive play with others, like tennis, golf, or badminton, or
dance.
Soccer, or dance. Perfect.
Welcome to the Evolving Past Alzheimer's podcast, where we are focused on bringing you information to help prevent from developing and improve from suffering with brain diseases like Alzheimer's and other dementias. I'm Dr. Nate Bergman, a physician and Chief Scientific Wellness Officer at Kemper Cognitive Wellness, and I'll be your guide on these sound waves. So whether you're a baby boomer who's worried that your brain wiring just isn't working like it once was, or you have a loved one with the disease, or you yourself have already been diagnosed and are wondering, what do I do now? You'll want to listen to this podcast. Each episode, we introduce you to the top doers and thinkers that are revisioning Alzheimer's, dementia, and just generally things in life's second half. If you have questions or comments, check us out on social media. To support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast. And consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show if you find these episodes valuable. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. So here we go. Let's get better.
Welcome back to the show. When I was a fourth-year medical student, I was so excited when I learned I'd be running around cardiology floors with our guest today. He's a teacher and mentor to me and many, many others, and one of the preeminent preventive cardiologists around. Dr. James O'Keefe is the Director of Preventive Cardiology at St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute in Kansas City and Professor of Medicine at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, where I did my residency training. Welcome to the show, Dr. O'Keefe.
Hi, Nate. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here.
You know, I don't know if you remember when we first met, but we first met in St. Luke's South when I was a little medical student. And you remember that?
Yes.
I often tell this story. I really tell this story quite a bit. When you basically taught me about something called postprandial glucose, which is the blood sugar response after we eat. And remember, we were sitting in the cafeteria, kind of running around the hospital, and then kind of, you doctors, you run down and grab food and run back to the hospital. And it's a very I don't know if it's the ideal way to eat, but it's it's how we eat and how we get through. And I was very proud of my lunch. My dietitian wife had prepared me a lunch, and you mentioned that your wife is a dietitian as well. And I remember I had some greens with some cruciferous vegetables, some broccoli, and some chicken or something like that, some kind of animal protein. And then I had maybe 4 tablespoons of rice. And I remember you looked, and you of course had very lean, probably fish, very small amount, and then some steamed vegetables over there. And I remember we talked, and you looked at the food, and we were kind of talking about nutrition and food and things like that. And you said you should check your blood sugar about an hour after you eat, postprandial glucose. And I said, why? You said, well, you'd be surprised how high it is. You remember you talking maybe about your daughter or some other family member had just sort of recently learned, and she was an athlete, and she had also recently learned that, blood sugars can spike quite high. And lo and behold, you hooked me up with a glucometer from one of the diabetes managers, the nurses there. I started checking my blood sugar, and it was high. I mean, it was like 130, 140, probably 150, 160s, kind of depending on what I ate. But I was just so surprised about how high the blood sugar went. And that was my foray into the world of Dr. O'Keefe.
Well, yeah, I really think that postprandial glucose is a super important parameter, and with these new continuous glucose monitors, Nate, as you know, they're fun to experiment with. They're powerful ways for behavior modification, because you can see even a healthy, athletic person like yourself, normal weight, not a trace of prediabetes, when you eat, easily digestible foods like white rice or mashed potatoes, or let alone things like cinnamon rolls or candy bars,
donuts,
donuts, the usual fare.
Yeah.
I mean, healthy people will get these shockingly high glucose levels of 140, 150, 160, 170, and when your glucose goes up, and then your insulin goes up, and if you keep repeating this cycle like most people do, it becomes kind of addictive, and it's really one of the big problems with why 2/3 of Americans are obese or overweight.
So there's a big correlation. I know you're a cardiologist, and most people are thinking, well, why is he having a cardiologist on the show about Alzheimer's? But we know that two-hit hypothesis, and there's a whole sort of group of researchers that are evolving a theory about that either it's some of the earlier entries or ongoing entries where people develop the same kinds of changes in their brains, amyloid and tau particularly, are the result of problems with their blood vessels and their heart. And so of course you've written quite a bit. I mean, you've written hundreds and hundreds of papers in general cardiology and all kinds of lifestyle and interventions, medications, but also have written about Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's prevention. So it's one of the reasons we wanted to have you on. So there are so many things we can talk about, but I really definitely want to talk about food as one of them, because you recently published an article called Pesco-Mediterranean Diet with Intermittent Fasting. And we're all about trying to figure out what is an ideal diet. And that's an age-old question and an age-old target, and there's many ideas on what might be the best. But I think that this so-called pesco-Mediterranean diet really has, with intermittent fasting, really has some teeth. And so if you could just kind of explain what that is, what you mean by that in this paper, and then kind of what the advantages are, kind of metabolic or overall health advantages, heart, blood vessels, brain.
Yeah, so Nate, as you know, and your listeners as well, is that diet is such a contentious topic, and partly because we all have our own sort of individual tastes and emotional kind of underpinnings about why we like certain things and maybe the way we were raised or whatnot. But so it's hard for people to be objective about diet, really. But and there's so much noise out there from a lot of different scientists,
Yeah.
and so it is hard to know. So we wanted to put together what would be the best evidence from good randomized trials and other good observational studies, and also what the latest guidelines recommend, and kind of put together sort of honestly, it's still a hypothetical diet because it hasn't been tested in a prospective study, but it's based on prospective studies that have elements of what we put in there. And specifically, the traditional Mediterranean diet is really the diet consumed by Mediterranean peasants, not the aristocracy. These people couldn't afford to eat high on the hog, so to speak, and the refined white flour and the added sugar. They were out there gardening and fishing and growing olive trees and vineyards and fruit trees, and they were gathering most of their food and growing it, and it was unprocessed, and they were eating a lot of olive oil and nuts. And this diet has been tested in a arguably the best prospective randomized trial ever on diet called the preventative study. And sure enough, that Mediterranean diet with either added olive oil or nuts was just trounced the American Heart Association low-fat diet for improving cardiovascular outcomes.
So I wanted to stop you there. You mentioned the American Heart Association diet. So can you just briefly describe what the American Heart Associate diet is? You mentioned low fat.
Yeah. So this is like this has been around for decades, and it's kind of like based on the theory that saturated fat is bad, so we want to eliminate all fat, and while we're at it, eliminate all animal, as much animal protein as you can and animal foods, and eat mostly, like traditionally they said 11 servings of grain products per day. And so a lot of Americans are eating refined grains, most of that, and they say, well, at least 3 of them should be whole grains. But even so, a diet like that is a recipe for insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, even dementia. So it's kind of not a great diet. And that things are finally starting to change. And this paper was published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology, and I'm hoping it will become sort of the de facto diet recommendation because it's based on the best science. And the other part of it is we said, like a vegan diet is not as healthy as a diet that has some like fish and seafood in it, because there's a lot of nutrients, vitamin B12 and the omega-3s and zinc and iron that are harder to get if you're eating just a purely plant-based diet. So we're omnivores, and we think that it's good to eat a diet that's this traditional Mediterranean diet that's higher in fat, but it's mostly unsaturated fat from olive oil and nuts and avocados and seeds and oily fish like salmon and tuna and sardines.
So I hate to always reduce into certain nutrients but we were having a conversation earlier, you and I, and it is, when you talk about, an ideal diet, there's low fat diets, and we'll probably talk about high fat diets or very high fat diets briefly. But you mentioned a couple of kinds of fats, particularly olive oil and nuts, and you were telling me kind of how you consume. What is the importance of something like olive oil? Like why does that come up over and over and over? What's so magical about olive oil?
Well, number one, it's very high in monounsaturated fats. It's a plant fat that down through the millennia has been consumed by some populations. And when we look at those observational studies, people eating a diet high in olive oil and nuts tend to have very good health, and especially good cardiovascular health and good longevity. But there's something particularly important about olive oil, is that you want to find one that's high in polyphenols, and you won't find that on the label. You have to learn to taste for that. And this is, if you take any olive oil and just take a half a teaspoon and swallow it by itself, and then just wait for 10 or 20 seconds, and you'll feel this black pepper stinging, burning kind of bitter taste back there. And the more intense that taste, the higher the polyphenols. If you don't have any of that, that's not an olive oil you should be eating at all. And every bottle you should test, because even the same brands can vary from one bottle to the next.
You have a one that's readily accessible to someone you might recommend?
Right. There's one, if you wanted to find it in your supermarket, there's one called Pompeian, Pompean, Pompeian, robust, robust. And the robust refers to, they have a milder one, but the robust is specifically referring to the fact that it's high in polyphenols. So yeah, try that. And that's a good example of one that's high in polyphenols.
Get a shot of whiskey and a shot of polyphenols and olive oil. It's right up there. It's the same bite. If you got a really good olive oil, it's like that same bite as like a bourbon or something.
Yeah. But those polyphenols are super important because they're dissolved in a healthy fat. And when you consume that fat, it seeps into, your blood vessels and your eyes and your brain and your skin and your heart. In other words, it carries those polyphenols with them, and those are powerful sort of health producing molecules that sop up the free radicals that tend to rust us from the inside out. So it's a great way to to add these very potent polyphenols to your diet.
So that's critical, and I want to circle back to that potentially later when we talk about a couple of other things. We talk about blood vessel function and endothelial function. The other thing I wanted to ask you about in terms of your thinking, we're all sort of, one of the things that COVID has taught a lot of us is in the general public in terms of medical science is all of the uncertainty that actually exists, as opposed to this sort of veneer of so much certainty, which is just not the case. So I spend a lot of time, as I've learned from you, that you spend a lot of time trying to develop a perspective around something. And one of the challenges right now, particularly when we talk about neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and the other things, vascular dementia even, is a ketogenic diet, right? A high fat diet where something like 70, 75, up to 90% of someone's daily intake of food, their calories, would be from fat sources. I know you've thought about the ketogenic diet, written about it. Where's your kind of state of the art or current thinking about the utility or the role, good or bad, neither, of the ketogenic diet?
Yeah, Nate, the ketogenic diet's still quite a popular diet. I've tried it myself a few times, not to lose weight, but just because I was curious about what it would do to my lipids and my sense of overall, well-being. I think it's interesting, but the problem is most people follow a ketogenic diet. They're massively increasing from cream and cheese and butter and red meat and fried. For a lot of people, including me, it raised my LDL cholesterol. I've seen patients go on a ketogenic diet at the same time, from some internet advice, stop their statin and go on a ketogenic diet. And sure enough, they lose weight, but their LDL literally go from 57 to 250. And a normal LDL, we like it less than 100. I mean, just shockingly bad lipid changes. It can lower triglycerides, and it often will improve insulin sensitivity. So my approach to the ketogenic diet is, if you want to do it, eat unsaturated fat. And that's a lot like the traditional Mediterranean diet we were just talking about. A lot of olive oil, a lot of nuts, seeds, avocados, and oily fish. So you get like most of your calories from those sources, and then lots of non-starchy vegetables and a little bit of low glycemic fruits like berries. If you want to do that, you can kind of get the benefits of the insulin resistance and the weight loss, but you'll also have improved LDL levels. So, but even so, I mean, it's hard to stick with a strict ketogenic diet for very long. I think it's more of a temporary thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in terms of sort of a brain energy rescue, there's actually decent data. There's a man named Russell Swerdlow over at University of Kansas, who's really one of the pioneers in what they call the mafia, the mitochondrial mafia. And he's very, very talented, brilliant research guy over at University of Kansas. He's the head of their Alzheimer's disease research center. And so he's kind of figuring how to use ketones. And I don't know that he's sold on the diet idea, but just the idea of ketogenesis and its potential utility in brain energy rescue. So usually we have people on a ketogenic diet for a period of time, but it's very, very hard to do. And then we also see very similar things. In fact, I have someone coming in tomorrow that's just did a 7-8 week, I think she called it a keto reset or something like that. And we're checking her lipids, and of course the cholesterols and the number of the LDL in particular, LDLP is elevated, LDLP, LDLC. So I see very similar things to you, but we do actually see some really interesting results as well. I was telling you earlier that we've had a couple of people come through. These are both men so far with type 2 diabetes, but they've had these really amazing responses by keeping their blood sugars down. So when they go keto or they're generally eating higher fats, very low carbohydrates, they just are clear. They have better days. Their memory is better. And that goes along with making sure they're doing the right kind of exercise as well. So I don't know. I'm still, jury's still out for me. I probably see it as a tool rather than like the truth. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And as we were talking about earlier, so like you have to keep an open mind and keep incorporating new data as it comes along. But one thing for sure, in my opinion, is the most evil component of the modern American diet, the standard American diet, is just heavy consumption of refined carbohydrates, added sugar, white flour, easily digestible carbohydrates, fruit juices, pop, soda, all that stuff. And so that's one great thing about the ketogenic diet. That is all completely off the menu. I mean, you have to eliminate all that stuff. That's the step number one. So that's a great place to start with diet.
Absolutely. So you mentioned dairy, right? You're not a fan necessarily of dairy and some of the very high fat foods like bacon. Can you explain kind of under the hood of the body physiologically what those things are doing? This may perhaps lead us into a conversation about inflammation and lab testing, things like that.
Yeah. So my opinion on dairy, and my wife and I disagree. I mean, she's usually right when it comes to diet. I mean, she's the dietitian and very practical, whereas we can have all these theories about why this is good or that's good, but she knows when the rubber meets the road, this is what's practical. But so she's a fan of dairy just because you need calcium. You need a steady source of calcium in the diet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I personally take an organic bone meal from a ground up bone, basically with some vitamin D3 and K2.
We wrote a paper on
that. I think that's a better way to get, and plus I'm a little lactose intolerant, but I think the dairy, the most inflammatory thing about the dairy is the lactose in there. And even lactose tolerant people, which is, most people from Northern Europe are still, as adults, they can still consume, milk, cow's milk without having trouble. But I've kind of gotten, so it really upsets me. So, but I think if you look through the data, and this is all observational, you can make a good argument that if you're going to consume dairy and you're concerned about health, you should mostly consume fermented dairy. So that would be, like yogurt and cheese and kefir.
Kefir, yeah.
Yeah, and those kinds of things, and stay away from milk. And I think cream is just not a great idea unless you want to add just a little bit to your coffee for taste. But I mean, it's all saturated fat. And butter is the same way. A little bit's fine for taste. And it's kind of how I feel about salt in the diet. It's like the healthiest foods in the diet are things like vegetables, nuts, fish. that you'll eat more of if you add some salt to it. So I say eat healthy whole foods and salt the taste. And my wife's totally on board with that.
Absolutely. And just to make sort of a final point, because I know a lot of what you do is talking about overall lifestyle, healthy lifestyle, but that it can be fun, it can be tasty, it doesn't have to be super restrictive. And so I've always appreciated about you and your wife's approach. One more comment on dairy, sort of leading into this inflammation conversation. What I notice when I have dairy, and I probably am a little lactose intolerant, like if I used to live when I was a kid in my parents' house, to my mom's dismay, she would once a week, she would go out shopping for groceries and she'd bring home some Breyers ice cream vanilla. And I'd probably in 1 or 2 days knock down that whole thing. I'd come home from school and have like a big milkshake. And then I'd have, gas and kind of the stomach things. But if I had a small amount of dairy, I wouldn't find that. But by the time I got about 30 years old, I started noticing when I had dairy, it was terrible for my skin. But also, interestingly, because I know you're interested in sort of mood-related things as relate to cardiovascular disease, I also noticed that it made my mood a little bit lower, just was sort of a little blue for the next day or so after about day and a half, 24, 36 hours. And also, it seems to slow my reading speed the day after. Like, let's say I had a piece of pizza or two at night. The next day, just my brain is more sluggish. Very, very interesting. Haven't seen much about that. I mean, and I wonder if this is sort of some kind of neuroinflammatory response,
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I find the same thing, not necessarily on those specific things, but like I'll eat some kefir or non-fat unsweetened yogurt, Greek yogurt, or some cheese. And the cheese doesn't bother me, but the yogurt still has, like maybe half the lactose in it, and it will upset my gut and just make me feel generally unwell.
Mm.
So but it's a small, like it's a dose related thing. If I use just, a couple ounces, ounce or two on berries and nuts, it's okay. But if I try to have a cup or even half a cup, it'll upset me. And I think a lot of people are like that. And the less you consume dairy, the more insensitive you become to it. So because you downregulate your ability to make lactase. Yeah, I think a lot of people are learning, things like too much dairy, too much sugar. These things are, and maybe too, a lot of people are sort of gotten that way about, wheat and especially refined wheat, this sort of gluten intolerance. Yeah, I mean, I think these are foods that, less is better.
Less is better. Less is better. We don't have to vilify it, but less is better. Sure. So we were talking in a previous conversation. You mentioned that like one of the potential benefits of extra virgin olive oil was improved endothelial function. You mentioned how it can kind of turn down the oxidative stress, the rust experience that happens in our cells and our blood vessels. But endothelial function is a really kind of an interesting piece as relates to the heart, blood vessels, and even the brain. Can you speak to the importance of just what is endothelial function, what are endothelial, and how it relates to kind of some of the things we're talking about here so far?
Yeah, so Nate, endothelium is the lining on the inside of the blood vessels, as an analogy, like the lining inside your mouth. I mean, it's this soft, smooth, shiny kind of Teflon non-stick surface that is super responsive to various chemicals. And when you get, and it's also responds almost immediately to changes in diet or emotional stress or sleep deprivation or smoking cigarettes or binge alcohol drinking. So it's kind of a sort of an early warning system of a lifestyle and diet that isn't working right. On the other hand, when you're doing the right thing, when you're doing some yoga, getting some vigorous exercise, getting your sleep, eating the kind of diet we were just talking about, your blood vessels get soft and supple and relaxed, and so it's really an important thing. It's why like erectile dysfunction in males is kind of an early warning system of somebody who's at risk for developing things like heart attack, stroke, heart failure, those kinds of things. We just published a paper in the American Journal of Medicine with a bunch of co-authors about the importance of a healthy Mediterranean diet, like we're talking about, for improving erectile function. And sure enough, it's quite effective. And one of the fun lines from that paper is like, erectile dysfunction is like the canary in the coal mine. It's an early warning system of trouble, and you better, make changes, or there's you better, pay attention and improve that.
Even if it's not the canary in the coal mine, it's the one thing that a lot of guys brings them to the office. You know what I'm saying? It
Right.
might not be the first thing, but it's definitely the last thing. You know?
Right. Right. To get their attention.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they usually just want the pill, want the
Yeah.
sildenafil, the Viagra, or the tadalafil. But diet and lifestyle works really well for that too.
So is there a way to kind of test endothelial function?
Yeah, there's lots of ways. There's not real super easy, quick and easy ways to test it. I think things like, just monitoring one's blood pressure at home goes a long ways towards, understanding the vascular health. And if you watch what happens, these new blood pressure cuffs. I love the Omron blood pressure cuffs, and there's one they have called Evolve, EVOLV, without the E at the end. It's a self-contained little cuff. It's super accurate. And I encourage people to, just get comfortable taking their blood pressures when they're stressed, when they're sleep deprived, when they're happy, when they're, just take it at different times and see what effect that has on it. Because it's like we were talking earlier with the glucose monitoring, you can tell when blood pressure is very, very, very much modifiable by lifestyle choices and diet.
Are you a fan of like carotid intermediate thickness tests?
I'm not. The carotid intermediate thickness is not nearly as good as, like, say, if you're looking for long-term prognosis. Carotid intermediate thickness is kind of more of a marker of age and blood pressure than it is sort of cardiovascular prognosis. A better marker would be the calcium scoring on a fast CT scan of the heart, looking for calcified plaque.
We ended up doing a lot of those. I think I can't remember if it was I don't know that I learned about coronary artery calcium scores from you, but you were certainly doing a lot of them and were publishing a lot on the value of coronary artery calcium scores. Can you just kind of tell us what that is? And because I know there was like a flurry of papers back in 2017, 2018, linking coronary artery calcium scores and risks for dementia. But what are those tests?
Yeah, so this is just a real fast CT scan, so that we can actually basically do a CT of the heart in between heartbeats. So while the heart is still, we can do a quick CT scan. We can't tell if there's any blockage without giving contrast. We can do a outpatient contrast CT, but you can get we charge $50 for this test, and it'll tell you how much calcium you have in your coronaries. And your coronaries should be soft and smooth and supple and have no calcium in them. Calcium is de facto evidence of atherosclerosis. And atherosclerosis is a lot like acne that we used to get as teenagers. And these are zits, these, pus-filled, this is oxidized lipids, triglycerides, and LDL cholesterol that gets, sort of fills up this volcano-looking thing, and then it ruptures and spills this atheromatous gruel out. And then in the healing process, the analogy would be like a deep pit scar that you get from acne that's lifelong. That would be like a bad atherosclerotic plaque that ruptures and then heals. And in the healing process, not only smooth muscle and fibrous tissue, but you get some calcium woven in there. And so the calcium in the coronary arteries is fossil evidence, if you will, of previous inflamed zits. And so it's, when we see the more calcium we see, the more plaque there is there, the worse the prognosis, not only from the heart standpoint, but can also predispose to, be a marker for Alzheimer's disease. So yeah, it's something that, we don't use it to, like, usher people into the cath lab for angioplasties and bypass surgeries, although that rarely happens. But what we do is we find people who need intensive risk factor modification, getting their cholesterol down, blood pressure better, improving their diet, working on exercise, because we can't make the calcium go away. That's like a bad acne scar. It's there for the rest of your life, but we can neutralize the risk with these kind of approaches.
And just to give people a sense, in case they haven't had one or they don't know what it is there like a standardized scoring that if you're above this, it's risk, or below this, it's a risk?
Yeah, 0 is normal. Up to 100 is mild. 100 to 400 is moderate. Above 400 is more significant. Above 1,000 is severe. The record that I've seen so far, we've done about 500,000 of them. I probably read about 150,000 of those myself in the last 20 years. But was 13,500. And a lot of these people, you'll like put the cursor, the Hounsfield unit on the X-ray image, you put it over their left main or proximal left anterior descending coronary artery, and their arteries are more bony than their spinal, their spine, the vertebral body. So that's a really bad, I like to joke, that's a bad, sign when your arteries are bonier than your bones. So, but that happens sometimes. And I mean, this is and it's so important to know, Nate, because this is a disease that festers below the surface for years to decades before it blows up and causes a stroke or a heart attack or dementia. So you need to, I think of this as a mammogram for the heart. Everybody, men over 40 or 45 and women over 50 or around the time of menopause ought to get one of these.
And so accessible. I mean, it's less expensive than a blood pressure cuff. It's a very low dose of radiation. I mean, it's a remarkable test. Really, I mean, it's free in some places, $50, $90, and a lot of other places. It's amazing. Thank you for going into that. I'd like to talk about exercise for a minute. I mean, it's probably worthwhile just briefly, like giving everybody a thumbnail on your history of exercise, because you are quite the exerciser. But there's trials going on all over the world for doses of exercise for brain and neuro and Alzheimer's and pre-Alzheimer's. But typically we say, what's good for the brain is good for the heart, or what's good for the heart is good for the brain. And can you just, as we get into exercise for a few minutes here, can you just give us your own background as an exerciser? Because it's impressive.
Well, yeah, sort of being a tightly wound overachiever. I took the same approach to exercise, and I would. I got really competitive about doing triathlons and, just hammering my body into shape. And I had fun with it, but honestly, I was just way too serious about it. And then I got to be about 40 or 45, and I started noticing when I'd go really hard on a bike, just really max it out, I'd kind of feel some palpitations, and I'd have a little aching afterwards in my chest. And I just didn't feel like suddenly it made me stop and think, what made me think that if exercise is good, that hammering my body as a 45-year-old into peak fitness and trying to keep up with 25-year-olds in races would be the best recipe for long-term health. So then I kind of started checking into some databases and working with some other people around the US and over in Europe even. And sure enough, it's certainly not surprising. Our mother or grandmother would have told us this, it's like, don't overdo it. Just because exercise is good, you don't need to be doing, especially once you get to be over age 25 or 30 or 35, really, really, like marathons or ultra marathons or full distance triathlons where you're exercising for, multiple hours at a vigorous, peak exercise. When you check, sure, the troponins are up. There's some heart damage. There's, it's a stress. It causes inflammation. So, these studies and my own personal approach is, I've just kind of relaxed about exercise. I still am very active, but I had some yoga, and I don't worry so much about. In fact, the only heart rate monitoring I do is I wear a Fitbit, and I want to make sure that my resting heart rate through the night stays, nice and low. And that means that I'm getting enough sleep and I'm not overdoing it, but I'm still, staying fit because I keep my resting pulse runs around 45. But the point is that exercise is good, but you need to be moderate about it.
Yeah.
And it's good to mix it up. And a recent study we did in the last couple of years found that surprisingly, the best exercise for improving, if you want to train for longevity, do some exercise that involves physical interactive play with others, like tennis, or golf, or badminton, or
dance.
Or dance. Perfect. These kinds of things, because they not only get your heart rate up, get you playing, but they're stress reducing. They make you happy. Before we had benzodiazepines for anxiety reduction or antidepressants or opioids for pain, we would do things like dance and play and pray. And these are powerful ways to improve mood and improve longevity from a natural source. And the other thing is, if you find stuff that feels like fun, you'll do it on
more.
your own, right? It's like we work hard all day, come home, oh, now it's time to do my workout. Like I've been working
So,
all day. No, I'd rather go have some fun, right? And you don't have to go to the bar to drink and have fun. You could, go play some tennis or whatever, kind of go dance,
I'm gonna go
but
dance here in 32 minutes. I'm gonna go dance. The
oh,
group
really?
oh yeah, we have
Yeah.
that group. So I mean, that's like it's like my really is a lifesaver. And you have a great newsletter where you talk a lot about this. This is from Mid-America Heart Institute, like from your group there, and you've been doing it for a long time and still get it, and it's great. I encourage people to sign up if they're able to.
Yeah.
It,
Tell me about your dance routine. What do
so
you
this
do?
is okay. Now I'm being interviewed. This is a first. So the dance routine, it's not choreographed. This is what we call conscious movement, or just sort of general open movement, conscious dance, conscious static dance. And typically, obviously before COVID, we were doing this in person. We were doing this since actually for a couple decades. But officially, I found a group when I was still in Kansas City back in 2014, maybe it was 2013 when we first. It's really the same time we met and we went to that, or when we started doing that paper together. And it was just like a revelation. This was just moving however you want to music with other people. And it's not like partnered up. It's not, hey, this is the routine for the day. So that it's not for everybody. Some people really do need probably a little bit more structure. And so there are people that are thinking through that. But we just get together and somebody, sometimes I'll do a playlist, sometimes somebody else will do a playlist, and usually there's a theme. So we'll have some minutes to talk. People can share a bit about what's on, kind of what's on their mind. Been obviously a lot of heavy stuff recently. I kind of unload that a little bit into the group, and then we just turn on the music. And some people turn off the screen, and if we're in person, obviously you can just kind of close your eyes if you wanted to. Other people are like me, are like running around the room and jumping up and getting on the floor, and I mean you're sweating, your heart rate's up, and it's just super fun. And even though it takes time away from my family, my wife still encourages me to do it because she thinks I'm a better human after I do it.
I love that. I'm gonna have to look for that because that is. I mean, I love to dance, but it is. It's hard to find opportunities to do that. And lots of times we'll just put music on, not lots of times, but occasionally, maybe once or twice a month, put some music on and dance under in the kitchen with my wife to some
Yeah.
music, for even 10, 15 minutes. But it would be fun to be more regular about it because I think
Oh yeah, and it becomes a practice. It's like your yoga. It's like your work. I mean, it's like this is the thing. It becomes a practice, and it's wonderful. So do you have a? So you mentioned. I thought it was interesting. You mentioned you're not really using like a Carbonin's equation for target heart rate. You're just really more looking at. You said resting heart rate.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about resting heart rate is what you find more valuable than some of these ideas of you got to get your target heart rate and get in this zone of exertion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think that I mean, I've done that sometimes, but I just think it's again, it's kind of reducing, it's taking the fun out of exercise. And once you start exercising, well, I like talking about like training for longevity
Mm-hmm.
or training for brain health or any of these things. You don't need to get formulaic about it. It's like get out there. I think I prefer outdoor exercise. There's something very, sort of emotionally kind of grounding and wholesome about getting outdoors for exercise, even when the weather is inclement. Get outside and get some exercise. It's very, very good for and regardless of your heart rate. I mean, like a good rule of thumb is if you're exercising with somebody, you should be able to carry on a conversation. I mean, but you should be a little breathless, if you're
Yeah.
talking like we are now without having to, stop to catch your breath at all. It's probably not hard enough. And if you're exercising so hard that you can't really carry on a conversation, it's probably, probably harder than you need to be doing. I mean, if you want to do some of that, that's fine. But I think it's more important to, if you're doing enough exercise, you get fit, your resting heart rate comes down. I mean, I think that's a more important a marker of
Excellent.
health.
I want to turn for a second and talk about it. Just a couple of other things because you recently sent me I think it was still a pre-publication copy of a article that you guys are publishing, group that you're involved with during the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, talking about TNF alpha inhibitors and the potential for Alzheimer's disease prevention. Fascinating area. Can you first kind of tell us about TNF alpha and its role in regulation of inflammation? Because that's obviously central in terms of some of the hypotheses of why Alzheimer's and many other diseases, including all dementia, depression and anxiety, and to some extent heart disease, cancers start.
Yeah, I mean, TNF alpha is sort of the master hormone that turns on a lot of the inflammation, and it's once you flip that switch, it triggers this cascade of cytokines that really generates an inflammatory response. It can be good for fighting foreign invaders like infections and whatnot, but in a lot of people, these maladaptive lifestyles and diet and stressful lifestyle we lead turns on this sort of low-level inflammation that is the underpinnings of a lot of the diseases we deal with, not only coronary disease, but type 2 diabetes and macular degeneration and Alzheimer's disease. So like acne, we were talking about earlier, osteoarthritis, a lot of the collagen vascular diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease. So really the inflammation, chronic smoldering inflammation is a real problem. And so there's been some studies looking at, for example, observational studies where people who were treated with powerful TNF alpha receptor blockers like etanercept, Enbrel, or adalimumab, which is Humira. For people with rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease who got treated with these TNF alpha inhibitors, alpha receptor blockers, had like 60 to 70% lower occurrence of Alzheimer's disease than people with diabetes. People with inflammatory bowel disease or rheumatoid arthritis who were not treated with these TNF alpha receptor blockers. So it's sort of like just a natural sort of observational experiment where people who got these drugs seem to be protected. Then there's a lot of animal data, some of it randomized, and there's some small randomized trials in humans with these agents that seem to say that they an effective way to lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. But I think maybe the thing that really made me write this article and get Richard Isaacson and Gary Small to help. These are two of the top, as you would know, neuroscientists in the country focused on Alzheimer's prevention and cognitive health in the long run. To work with me on this is Dr. Small and his colleagues at UCLA did a study with theracurmin. It's a type of curcumin that's a nanoparticle colloidal suspension.
Theracurmin.
Theracurmin, or THERACURMIN. And it's just a curcumin that's very well absorbed. Curcumin comes from the spice turmeric. Both of these compounds are very sort of hydrophobic, just absorbed at vanishingly small amounts if you take them orally. So that's why, this one with this nanoparticle colloidal suspension gives you nice high blood levels when you take an oral dose of it. And so anyway, Dr. Small was looking around to sort of prove the validity of, he has a proprietary product that they developed at UCLA that is a way to quantitate the alpha tau tangle, the tau tangles and the beta amyloid protein in the brain. And so he was looking for an intervention that would be likely to reverse that. And so he chose theracurmin based on some animal studies and theoretical issues that we were just talking about TNF alpha. Oh, by the way, I should mention that theracurmin and curcumin in general, if you get the blood levels high enough, will reduce TNF alpha levels by 50%.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
So that's why we included this in this review paper we just wrote. But in this study of only 40 people, non-demented, middle-aged to older adults, ages 50 to 80, I think average age was about 62, 63, that the people that got the theracurmin had improvements in cognitive performance, mood, and general mental functioning in 5 different psychometric testing they did. Yeah. But they also using this PET technique to quantitate the protein, the people who got the theracurmin mobilized these tau tangles and beta amyloid out of the brain. So, really, really sort of powerful data, especially when you put it in with the animal stuff and the observational. Nate, I really think that this is a very promising. I mean, I would be surprised if it doesn't work. We have so many sort of indicators. And the other thing about Theracurmin, because this is an over-the-counter product. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
the chief medical officer and founder of a company called Cardiotabs, and about 5-6 years ago, I chose this Theracurmin for. So we market this as just Cardiotabs curcumin. But I looked at all the different curcumins and decided the data was best on this one, and then subsequently this article came out from Richard Small and his group. I mean, Gary Small and his group. But the thing is that I mean, my kids take this stuff, and I recommend it for my patients. I take it lots of times because this is also like when you take this compound. I mean, most people will notice an almost immediate like brightening of mood and sharpening of cognition and like better memory. My wife says she's like dreaming of things that happened to her when she's 8 and like these details that she hadn't thought of in decades. And I mean, I think and people say, well, how does this work even? Because like these big molecules like etanercept, the TNF alpha receptor blocker, and Theracurmin, they don't get anywhere near, I mean, they're way too big to get through the blood-brain barrier. So how could this possibly prevent Alzheimer's? Or how could it possibly improve mood? And by the way, in meta-analyses, this is as good as SSRIs for improving mood, curcumin. But what it does is TNF alpha does cross the blood-brain barrier. And when you powerfully reduce inflammation at the systemic level in the bloodstream, that then translates, it diffuses across the blood-brain barrier. So the TNF alpha levels fall in the brain and the inflammation goes down in the brain and the brain works better.
That's something people can just like go out and get. It's Theracurmin. It's in a number of products, bioavailable form of curcumin, 90 milligrams twice a day. Of course, ask your doctor if you take it, but it's a remarkably simple intervention, and it is improving, like you said, the small studies, memory, attention, and then seems to trend for improvements of mood and some other things like that. It's pretty amazing.
In that study of Dr. Small's, where they used it in humans, they used 180 milligrams twice daily. So that's what I often recommend. It's 180 milligrams of curcumin in the form of Theracurmin. It's actually 600 milligrams twice daily, but it delivers 180 milligrams twice daily of Theracurmin.
Beautiful. Thank you for the dosing. I wanted to ask you just one or two other questions here as we close out. Fish oil, right? Fish oil, omega-3 fatty acids. There was just another big paper that came out sort of, we get these once a year, once every couple of years. It's like, oh, fish oil, we finally put the fish oil story to bed. It doesn't work. A lot of that comes from the cardiovascular literature, and a lot of that comes from the cardiovascular literature produced from the city that I live in, right down the street in Cleveland Clinic. You and I have talked about this before. I've talked about this with many people. I don't think we've talked about it on the show so much though, but this is news. Oh, fish oil doesn't work. What's your response to that in terms of like EPA? I know you have a lot of thinking on this.
Yeah, and we've just written a couple papers on it as well. So, and it drives, physicians and the general public crazy because, it's just whipsawing them back and forth. This works, it doesn't work, it works.
Yeah.
But the best answer to this, and we've just added this strength trial, which was 25,000 people. 12,000 people randomized to about 4 grams per day of an EPA, DHA, unnatural form of omega-3 free fatty acids that's highly acidic, not well tolerated from a GI standpoint. I mean, we were all surprised that it didn't work, to be honest with you, because this is just on the heels of the Reduce It trial, which was all EPA a couple of years ago that showed these just really remarkable, highly significant reductions, 25% reduction in risk of heart attack, stroke, cardiac death, highly significant p-values. But if you put all this together, which is what you have to do, and take all the randomized controlled trials of omega-3 and do a meta-analysis on it, and including the strength data in that, okay, that's the latest one, and the Reduce It, which was only 7,000 people, but still is a big trial, along with the others, you have upwards of 150, 200,000 people who have been randomized in large, in randomized controlled trials. And sure enough, you do see a dose-dependent reduction in risk of things like major adverse cardiovascular events. and it's dose dependent, so that you get maybe an 8% reduction in things like heart attack and sudden death.
Not insignificant.
And
It's still fairly significant.
yeah. Well, no, but you'd get that with 1 gram of EPA plus DHA. If you use 2 or 3 or 4 grams, you generally get better results. And if you're trying to lower triglycerides or reduce inflammation, I tend to prescribe bigger doses.
What, like 3 grams, 3,000 milligrams, or how much?
Yeah, 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams per day of EPA plus DHA.
Yeah.
And this is inexpensive. You can find products out there that deliver this over the counter. But especially the average American, consumes less than 250 milligrams a day, like 100 milligrams a day of EPA plus DHA. This is a fundamental, really important, pair of fatty acids that are important for your eyes and your brain and your heart and your lipids. And most people benefit from an omega-3 supplement.
Okay. Yeah. So the jury's, I mean, there's literally thousands of papers talking about the benefits, and we just, we have this one paper, and then the headline, of course, says they don't work. And the last thing I want to mention, I want to ask you about, and this is, I don't have a specific question. We talked before about coronary artery calcium scores, or evidence of heart disease. There are certainly a lot of people, and I have a number of patients that are, if the men died of heart disease when they're in the 50s, the women in the family died in their mid 70s, late 70s of Alzheimer's. And I meet these people oftentimes when they're in their 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s, and we talk about statin medication or medications, or what is a strategy to protect someone's heart, their blood vessels, from developing frank heart disease, and then over time developing the changes that end up in Alzheimer's disease. Where do you, you're not someone who's ever vilified statins. We could argue about the benefits of them for just high cholesterol, but you're deep in the weeds with people that are very, very sick. And then you have also people coming for optimization and prevention. Where does statins fit in the toolbox of Dr. O'Keefe? And when do you reach for a statin medication? Because I feel like they've been sort of unfairly vilified in some circles, and I feel like they've been sort of unfairly featured in other circles. I'm curious to know how you've evolved your practice.
Well, so if somebody has heart disease, statins are, in my opinion, if they have atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, like they've had a heart attack,
lifesavers,
bypass, or stent, they benefit from a statin. There is just no scientific doubt about that. That's very clear. Or if they've had an ischemic stroke, like a plaque in their carotid that ruptured, or if they've had a carotid endarterectomy.
Clear benefit. Would never take someone off.
Clear benefit, no question about it. And they're safe, well-tolerated medications, super cheap. There's no ulterior motive that doctors are getting rich by prescribing these things. That's just nonsense, conspiracy theory kind of nonsense. But on the other hand, that's one of the things I love about the cardioscan, Nate, is we do a cardioscan on a 55-year-old guy.
And that's the coronary artery calcium score that we talked about.
The coronary artery calcium score, and it's 0. And so their cholesterol is 250 and their LDL is 160. And,
so those are high numbers, but their score on the coronary artery calcium score is very, very low. It's undetectable.
Right. So then we say, well, you've gotten through 55 years of life without making any calcified plaque. So,
right.
Yeah, it's optional. If you want to take a statin, that'll make your cholesterol, probably make your risk go down some, but your risk is quite small for the next 5 years. It's less than 1 in 250 of dying of a heart attack. So you could work on diet and exercise, maybe take some fish oil, maybe, like we said earlier, focus on dietary interventions that have been shown to improve prognosis. And then there's other options too. Ezetimibe is a great cholesterol lowering medication that reduces absorption of cholesterol from the gut.
Non-statin, okay.
And it's a non-statin, and it also has like the statins, has been proven to reduce heart attack, stroke, and cardiac death. So lots of times use ezetimibe. People who don't tolerate statins, we love PCSK9 inhibitors. These are fully human monoclonal antibodies that are very effective at lowering LDL cholesterol with virtually no side effects. So, that's another good option too, especially, in combination. We can use PCSK9 inhibitors with ezetimibe and not affect, cholesterol synthesis at all. And, some people argue that it's good to leave cholesterol synthesis sort of unpoisoned, if you will, like so that your brain cells, if they want to make cholesterol, they can make cholesterol, but you still keep the serum cholesterol low by preventing absorption of cholesterol from the gut, from the diet, and also by the monoclonal antibody just basically increases the durability of your LDL receptors so that you filter out more of the LDL particles out of the bloodstream and metabolize it in the liver. So those are good strategies to lower cholesterol without messing with cholesterol synthesis.
Dr. McKeith, this has been wonderful. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time here. I truly appreciate you making time, and again for all that you've taught me and anything I've taught others because of you. We appreciate your work.
Right. All right, Nate. It's my pleasure. So good to talk to you, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay. So that's our episode. I hope it was useful to you. Check out the show notes on iTunes or on our website where we've summarized the key points. If you find the information here valuable, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and leaving comments in the comments section. It will really help us bring this message to as many people as we can. If you have questions or comments, connect with us on social media. Finally, to support us, go to patreon.com/evolvingpast and consider hitting the button and becoming a patron of this show. That's Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/evolvingpast. Thanks, and talk to you next time.